Hi. I disappeared again. What else is new? Life got crazy again. This time, I quit my job, interviewed, started a new job with a vastly different schedule, and had my car stolen with a bunch of my stuff in it within the span of like 3 weeks. So, that was my September. But I'm back, and I wanted to do a video for Halloween, because I love Halloween. I was initially going to do a full movie review, and it's in the works, but I realized I definitely wasn't going to be able to finish it by the actual holiday, so you're gonna have to put up with a spooky video in November. It's still worth it, don't worry. But in the meantime, I decided to do a shorter video with Halloween topics that I find interesting that wouldn't constitute a full video on their own. So it's gonna be kind of scattershot. I have some monster movie topics, a couple animatronic topics, but all related to Halloween in some way, obviously. That's about as much as I have for an intro, so let's get started.
I know what it feels like to be gone.
I'm not sure if this is something that anyone else has ever wondered, but it struck me earlier this year. Imagine Frankenstein's monster in your head, just from pop culture. If a TV show did a parody of him, or if you generally need visual shorthand to show him, what would he look like? Big guy, bolts in the neck, flat head, and green, right? Most of these make sense, because most of them are drawn straight from the 1931 Universal movie. But something didn't quite add up to me, because the Universal movie is in black and white. Where did this ubiquitous green color come from? It makes some sense in cartoons, because it's dead tissue. Green is a common way to show that, like a zombie. But to me that doesn't explain just how unanimous it is. There should still be some versions showing a more flesh tone, or a gray, or a bluish, or other colors that can indicate death. So I felt like it had to come from somewhere. And, well, it did. In black and white movies and TV shows, colors were still carefully chosen for how they would show up on camera. Not for how the colors themselves would look, obviously, but for how the tones would show up on the black and white stock. My understanding of camera quality in this era and in every era is limited, but if you want something to look bright or stand out, it still helps to color it appropriately. So lots of things in old films and TV shows were really odd colors because it looked better. Probably the most popular example nowadays is the bleak and dreary Addams Family set actually being covered in pink and other bright pastels, and the same was true of the monster's makeup. In reality, it was bright green, not as a character choice, but because it showed up really nicely on the black and white film stock. And on top of that, because of that, when painters came to get references for how they should style the posters, they saw Boris Karloff in this really bright green makeup and said, "Oh, I see, the monster is green," and painted the posters that way, which is how the general public made the connection and not just the film crew. Even then, there are some posters from the period that render the monster in a much more human, Caucasian flesh tone color. So really, this absolutely iconic aspect to this character could be considered a mistake. My favorite poster is actually this one because it looks like a clickbait thumbnail. Las Noches del Hombre Lobos, or Night of the Wolfman in English, is a 1968 horror movie starring Paul Naschy as Waldemar Daninsky, a student, I believe a college student, who is a werewolf. He confides in a professor of his, Dr. Wolfenstein, played by Peter Beaumont, who promises to help him, but instead harnesses Daninsky's lycanthropy to enact his own violent revenge against his enemies. It was written and directed by René Govar and was part of the Monsters of Terror series. It sounds pretty cool, but there's one minor issue. Everything I just told you is completely unconfirmed. From the plot, the release year, to the existence of the director, it all comes from the only actual source that we have from this story, Paul Naschy. Naschy was a real Spanish actor and screenwriter who was very prolific in Spanish horror films. He played several werewolves, even in the same continuity of the Monsters of Terror series. But Night of the Wolfman wasn't one of them. Probably. See, Naschy said in an interview that he did film this movie and work with René Govar, but the film was never released because Govar died in a car accident while the film was being processed, so the reels were never picked up from the lab and were thus thrown away. But this story in itself is incredibly suspect. Realistically, someone else would have been appointed to pick up the reels. This was supposedly the third film in the series, so presumably it would have had some kind of studio support at that point. They wouldn't just let it rot there. Along with the fact that there is no record of a Spanish director named René Govar. Not just no records of his untimely death, but no records of him whatsoever. More than that, the rest of the supposed cast, like Peter Beaumont, who I mentioned, Monique Brainville, and Helene Vittel, are also complete ghosts with no traces of existence whatsoever. Just a quick side note, Bebe Novak, the other name on this list, does seem to be a real actress who existed. Just in case anyone was wondering, since her name is also Red, she was real, she's just very obscure. So what's the deal? Did Naschy just make this up? And why? Well, there are two main theories. One is that Naschy made this up to pad out his resume. This is possible. It's not uncommon for actors to do this, or at least it didn't used to be. And it would have been early in Nashi's career, so it made sense. The only thing that stops me from believing this is that he brought it up in an interview years later. Putting a fake movie title on your resume is one thing, but making up entire fake people for it sounds like another. It would just draw way more attention to this fake film that you'd probably want to remain fairly inconspicuous. But perhaps he was overcompensating in case someone did look it up and see that it was missing. Maybe he was trying to cover his bases, I don't know. The other theory is that he's confusing it for La Furia da Hombre-Lobo, or Fury of the Wolfman, which has a similar plot and did come out almost a decade later. I don't think this one is very plausible, just because it doesn't explain any of the fake details that he made up. One last question then. If Nashi most likely did make this up to pad his resume, if that's the most accepted theory, what's stopping people from concluding beyond a reasonable doubt that that's what happened? Why is there still any ambiguity? Well, because of this. This is supposedly the only still saved from Las Noches del Hombre Lobo, and it's said not to be found anywhere else. Like I said, there are lots of movies in the Monsters of Terror series, and I want to make it clear that I haven't checked to see if this frame is in any of them. The makeup appears to be similar, or even the same as other movies in the series where Nashi played a werewolf. So I think it is still possible that it did come from one of them, because again, I haven't checked myself, it's only hearsay that this image is unique. But it is considered common knowledge that this image is unsourced. So is it from the lost movie? Was it real? We might never know.
There is no quicker way for people to think that you are diddling kids than by writing a song about it.
Shifting gears, I've recently been getting into Halloween animatronics and props. I don't know, call them my autism machines, but I really like the tech behind a lot of them. I really like the creativity and the theming. Not to mention there are unique pieces from like every year since 2005, and that's only counting Spirit and no other brands. There's so many of these things. I don't know, I just think they're neat. But with so many releases, there are bound to be some flops, and among the flops, there are a couple that are considered, if not bad, kind of controversial. That's surprisingly few considering the sheer volume and nature of the sculptures they put out, but I wanted to talk about a couple. This is Waving WallE. He's a clown animatronic from 2019, and he is considered one of the best clown animatronics the company has ever made. The theme of clowns itself is generally overdone, and it was even back in 2019, but WallE is different. He's not a monstrous clown. In fact, he's really human and fairly mundane. But I really think the humanness is what makes him so scary. He looks so benign. It's only really his eyes that show malicious intent. It's chilling. But this all sounds pretty normal. He doesn't even have any blood on him, so what's the problem? I wasn't able to find any hard proof of this, that this was what was intended, but he comes off less of a child killer like most other monster clowns, and more of a child monster. He has 3 phrases. One is just maniacal laughter, and here's one.
You look like a natural for our freak show. If you need a job, I'll introduce you to the boss, but all applicants must be dead. That's not a problem, is it?
And here's the other.
Everybody has good childhood memories of the carnival. Follow me. I promise we will give you some new memories you will never forget.
It's not hard to see why. And more importantly, he actually had one more phrase that got cut before he was officially released.
Come with me to the big time. We will have such a fun time. I love to play games. I know the back way into the tent. I will show you the way. Come with me.
Yeah, I get it. I don't think this one is worse than the other one though, so I'm not really sure why this one got cut. But they are creepy in a generally different way than, like, monster clown creepy. It's definitely ambiguous enough not to be in bad taste, but I personally kind of do read this guy as more, yeah, you know. But the other animatronic we're going to talk about is definitely in bad taste, but for a very different reason. Because she was based on a real murder victim. Demonic Dahlia is another prop from 2019. Daring this year, aren't we? She's a jump scare prop that's in a sitting position and pops up to stand, scaring you. But if you're familiar with true crime, you might recognize the name. She's based on Elizabeth Short, more widely known as the Black Dahlia case. She was a 22-year-old who was horrifically mutilated and murdered, and dumped on the streets of LA in 1947. It was sensationalized a lot at the time because of how bizarre and gruesome it was. Two notable details about the case are that along with her other awful mutilations, her mouth was cut into a Glasgow smile, and before her death she was said to be frequently dressed in all black, which is one of the reasons the case was dubbed the Black Dahlia in the first place. Both were aspects that were taken for this Halloween lawn decoration, as well as the name, obviously. It is horrendously poor taste, and unlike Waving WallE where it's generally ambiguous and just kind of speculation, this was very intentional and did draw some backlash from people who recognized it. I know obviously there will always be inspiration from real cases taken for scenes like this, it's just the nature. Every serial killer ever is based off of Ed Gein in some way, and there's a discussion that can be had about that too, but I do think there is a difference between taking inspiration to tell a new story and repackaging the already unfortunate sensationalism of a real identified homicide victim and using her to sell a prop. A literal prop. And honestly, if they even just changed the name, I think it would have been a lot better. The rest of it could be played off as generic. It's not like there are no other characters that have Glasgow smiles. Hell, her working title was Sit and Stand Shirley, which is perfectly in line with the naming conventions of other spirit props, so I don't know why they didn't just use that. Yeah, it's gross. I don't like it. There's a comparative prop from 2023 called The Widow, which is very similar, but instead is an undead corpse of a hanging woman. And despite that also being a terrible way to die, since it's not meant to represent a real person, it hits a completely different note, and I like this prop a lot. There's just a line to me. Anyway, moving on to something a lot lighter and a lot funnier to end this video off. This one's short, but Spasm is another Spirit Halloween prop, this time from way back in 2005 by Morbid Enterprises. And whether or not you think you've seen him, you probably have. He's the Russian sleep experiment picture. This was discovered a few years back, and I'm still kind of in awe. How is the sculpt for this consumer-grade prop so realistic that it fooled an entire generation of kids into thinking it was a real person? A lot of it's the black and white, but still, like, oh, holy shit. But you probably guessed, since he's from 2005, he's been out of production for a while. Like I said, they make new shit like every year and retire old ones after a while, so you couldn't buy Spasm firsthand for ages. And no one really cared. No one cared until we identified him as a creepypasta character, at least. He was initially sold for $150, and if he was going in store in 2024, that would be equivalent to about $250. But now, he's a part of internet history now. So right now, he is selling on eBay for anywhere from between $600 to $1,400. Brother. There was a listing for $3,000, but I'm not sure if that one actually sold. Though I can't find a picture anymore, so I'm assuming maybe it did. That's funny enough in itself, but as I was scripting this video, there was a development. I was trolling Facebook Marketplace for Halloween items for my new apartment, and I found a listing for a lot of two quote-unquote vintage animatronics. And one of them I wasn't familiar with, and the other was Spasm, in a town not far from me, for $150. I was shocked. Where was I gonna put it? I don't care. The Russian torture victim can go in my living room. So I messaged them, and someone had already picked it up, like within 2 days. I was so disappointed, but not at all surprised. Like I said, that is an insane price for the prop, and I was already feeling a little guilty that I wasn't gonna offer more for him, knowing that he was worth it. So maybe it's karma. Anyway, that's my disappointment for this year. Showing this guy off in my own house would have been the perfect end to this video, but we do what I can, I guess. Happy Halloween, everyone. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this weird little scattershot video I put together. I forgot to mention, if you're curious about Las Noches del Hombre Lobos, Internet Investigator has a way more in-depth video about it. I'll link it below. It's very good. And hopefully I can get back to my planned schedule in November. I haven't forgotten about Caped Crusader, I just need to decide how I want to go about reviewing that, if it's episode by episode or doing an overview, or both. But I will, I really liked it. So look for that soon, and like I said, have a very good Halloween.